Hey Zoology, this is Unit 3, the worm phyla. Now, worms are not always the most beloved animals because they are gross and parasitic and simple and very strange when compared to us and other mammals, and so we're not very comfortable around them. But we have three major phyla of worms. There are a couple others, but they're rather small, so we're focusing on the main three, phylum Platyhelminthes, phylum Nematoda, and phylum Annelida. And so these three phyla have some similarities, some differences, and they are kind of the three major phyla of the worm. So we put them all together just to kind of, like a Band-Aid, get them over with. But there are a lot of really cool things in here. So while you might think that worms are gross, and they are, there are a lot of really interesting things about them, and they really were some of the first organisms that really developed into the more advanced organisms later. So first phylum is phylum Platyhelminthes. Okay, 4 syllables. 5 syllables? I don't know. I'm not counting. Anyways, these are the flatworms. So Platyhelminthes means flat worms. So all of these worms are going to have kind of a flattened structure. They're not going to be round. When you look at them from kind of a cross section, they're going to be more flattened. But beyond that, they are the first true triploblastic organisms. So reflecting back to our animal basics, we said that depending on how gastrulation goes, organisms can develop two major dermal layers, the ectoderm or the outside, and the endoderm or the gut. There is a third germ layer that develops in, or third dermal layer that develops in more advanced organisms called the mesoderm. Meso means middle, so essentially is the middle layer. It is found between the two layers. This is the first group to actually have a mesoderm. The mesoderm is traditionally going to develop into possibly a coelom or an internal cavity where they can have organs. The mesoderm also is what actually develops into the organs. So if they do have organs, they are likely going to be developed from the mesoderm. So even though they have a mesoderm and they are triploblastic, they are acoelomates. So what that means is that if you were to look at a cross-section of them, you would see no cavity. So coelom, C-O-E-L-O-M, a coelom is basically an internal cavity. So if something has a coelom, it may be a true coelom, it may be a false coelom, but a coelom is an internal cavity. These are acoelomates. So while they have mesoderm, the mesoderm is going to be kind of solid on the inside. So there's no kind of major internal cavity in there. They have the bilateral symmetry. So we saw that sponges had asymmetry or no symmetry. Cnidarians had radial symmetry. This is the first group to have bilateral symmetry. Now, that is the order in which it becomes more advanced. Bilateral symmetry is the most advanced of the three. So if something is bilaterally symmetrical, what that really means is that it's split down the middle, and it's because it needs double copies of some organisms and some body parts to be able to perform certain functions. So the bilateral symmetry is indicative of the fact that this organism is likely more of a predator, or more of something that's going to go after something, something that has more ability to actually decide a direction to go and go in that direction. So that is something that really starts to happen with bilateral symmetry. And you'll see with these organisms, there is some cephalization in certain styles, particularly in this phylum. They are hermaphroditic, also known as monoecious, and that means that each organism is traditionally possesses the ability to produce egg and sperm, and so therefore they don't necessarily have to find another organism to undergo sexual reproduction. They have what's referred to as an incomplete gut. This is similar to the cnidarians. In fact, very similar. The cnidarians had that gastrovascular cavity where the mouth and the anus were the same. These are going to have the exact same style thing. And they are organized on the organ and organ system level. So sponges were organized on the cellular level. Cnidarians were tissue, a little bit more advanced. These are even more advanced, being organized on the organ and organ system level. So what that means is that they have actual organs. They have the ability to perform complex functions. And they can range in size from 1 millimeter up to about 20 meters. Those are the tapeworms. Anyways, so when we talked about being triploblastic, like I said, we have our ectoderm, we have our endoderm or the gut, and then we have the mesoderm. That's going to be all of this kind of orangey area. However, outside of the gut, in something that has a true coelom or even a false coelom, there's going to be open space around out here. In an acoelomate, there is not. So flatworms or phylum Platyhelminthes, these are acoelomates. They do not have any sort of major internal cavity, even though they do have mesoderm. So in terms of their digestive system, as I said, it's an incomplete gut. So what that means is that there's one opening. The mouth and the anus are the same opening with the gastrovascular cavity inside. That is exactly like the cnidarians. Now, it's a more advanced gastrovascular cavity. In the cnidarians, it just kind of was a big opening on the inside. In flatworms, particularly this style of flatworm, it's going to be more branched throughout the body. And so it's going to be able to actually get increased surface area, get those nutrients out to more cells faster. But still, that incomplete gut, the exact same thing. Mouth and anus going to be exactly the same. In terms of a nervous system, now, like I said, with bilateral symmetry, we have more of a directional focus in terms of our ability to go after things, go towards things we need, etc. And that bilateral symmetry, focusing in a certain direction, is what leads to cephalization. Now, going back to our animal basics unit, by definition, cephalization means the congregation or the moving of a lot of the nervous system up to the anterior end of the body. So if I'm bilaterally symmetrical and I am moving in one direction rather than just, flying around like a jellyfish, then what that means is that that direction, that part of my body should have all of my ability to see what's coming or to detect what's coming. Because if I'm heading towards some sort of danger, I want to be able to detect it before I get there. And so the direction or the part of my body heading towards that first needs to have the strongest part of my nervous system. So they have cephalization. You can actually, in most of them, you can tell which end is the anterior end because it is very obvious. It is unique. It has, in the case of many flatworms, eye spots. So eye spots actually give them the ability to see light and dark, similar to the eye spots of class Cubozoa and the cnidarians, the box jellyfish. So it's not complex vision, but they can sense light and dark. That gives them an idea of kind of, which direction predators are coming from or other types of things like that. If they're going to be damaged by the sun, they recognize to get to a darker area. So they also have auricles. Auricles are involved in sensing things around them. So again, sensory type things. They are responsible for being involved with their ability to detect chemicals around them, so essentially smell. They also are slightly involved in some sort of like pressure, so almost like hearing. So they can detect pressure changes to an extent, very, very little, but they can. Then from that kind of congregated area of nerves, there are going to be nerve cords that run the length of the body. That is, again, kind of, instead of just a blanket net like the cnidarians have, we have more of a central nervous area and then a branching system off of that. So it's more organized in terms of their ability to detect things and their ability to make decisions. In the excretory system, now with cnidarians, we didn't really talk about excretory system because anything that goes in their gastrovascular cavity just goes back out. But for these, when they're becoming more advanced, their digestive system is more advanced, their GVC more branched and advanced, they're going to end up with waste. And so as a result, they are the first to develop an actual excretory system. So they have these unique cells called flame cells, vocabulary, that can rid the body of chemicals and can regulate the water in the body. So these are all going to be aquatic organisms or organisms that surround themselves in a water-based environment, whether it be in the gut of an animal or whether it be in an actual river, pond, lake, whatever. So they can regulate and moderate the amount of water that's in the body so they can get the concentration down keep it from getting too salty or too fresh or whatever. And so they use them kind of like kidneys, and then they excrete them through any sort of waste that's filtered out of the body through pores on the surface. In addition to filtering waste out, that is also where they can undergo respiration. So bringing oxygen in from the water around them, pushing CO2 out. Even though they're not breathing, they are still needing oxygen for cellular respiration and releasing carbon dioxide as a product. And so they still need a way to get rid of those. In terms of reproduction, they can undergo asexual and sexual. Similar to sponges, even though they're more advanced, similar to sponges, they have the ability to be fragmented and regenerate. So if you cut a flatworm in half, they are able to regrow what was missing. So very interesting. So similar to sponges in that respect. Now you can't like dissolve them like you can with sponges, like we saw in the video for sponges, but you can cut them and go from there. And so that's a really interesting thing, the regeneration and fragmentation. Sexually, they are hermaphroditic, so they can reproduce with themselves, although much like with many organisms, sponges and cnidarians included, even though they have the ability to produce sex cells for both, they are primarily going to attempt to undergo actual sexual reproduction. So they are going to attempt to exchange sperm and eggs with another animal of their species because that is the best way to increase genetic diversity. So in terms of the actual classes, the first one is class Turbellaria. Common name are the true flatworms. So that is what their common name is. We often call the common name Planaria because that is the most common of class Turbellaria. The planarians and then the marine flatworms, but they are all very flat. They're kind of the cutest ones. They have like little heads and either they're brightly colored or they're just cute, and you'll get to see some. Sorry, I got interrupted, but it was a good video. I don't want to go back. Okay, so like I said, class Turbellaria, the true flatworms, they're mostly going to be free living, which means that you'll just find them either on reefs, in the marine environment, on rocks. They're not parasitic. So the two big categories we're going to see here are that some of these are free living, which means that they eat things outside of themselves. A lot of them are decomposers. And then the other half is parasites. So they are not the same. So this one says carnivores or scavengers. So again, they can scavenge and be decomposers, or they can go after smaller animals. And then it says a ciliated epidermis. So if you recall the choanocytes of the sponges, they had a flagella that whipped back and forth. Well, if you took that flagella, split it into 50 tiny ones, that's cilia. So they're just lots of little, flagella would be like an arm, cilia would be like fingers. So lots of little cellular structures that allow them to kind of go across surfaces. So specifically, like I said, we have planarians and then the marine flatworms. They are huge predators on coral reefs. Now, obviously, they're not massive, but they are predators. So they have the ability to go after things on the reef, and they are pretty voracious. Very interesting reproductive behavior. You'll see it in the video, so I don't need to go into much detail. It's referred to as penis fencing. Because they are hermaphroditic, only one of them gets to be the male and one gets to be the female. So they essentially battle it out to figure out who's going to win. You'll see a video. All right, so second class that we're looking at, so the first one is class Turbellaria. Second is class Trematoda. The trematodes are the flukes. So these are all going to be parasitic. They are mostly going to be parasites inside of vertebrates, so things that have backbones. So that's going to be mostly mammals. Many of them are in pigs, cows, humans, etc. Couple examples. So diving in a little bit deeper, I said they're all parasitic. So there are liver flukes, lung, heart, intestine, and bladder. All of those, when you hear about animals getting heartworms or things like that, they are flukes. They are from class Trematoda in phylum Platyhelminthes. So they are flatworms. So just like with the other classes, just like with the previous class, they have one opening. Mouth and anus are both in the pharynx. Pharynx is, we'll dive a little bit deeper into it, but the pharynx is a tube that is from the bottom of their body that they use to feed with. And so essentially they use that to attach to the internal digestive system of whatever they're attempting to parasitize. and will pull in host tissue and body fluid, usually blood, in that respect. They have a very complex life cycle. A lot of flukes actually have more than one host. So, like I said, they can be found in a lot of vertebrates. So sometimes certain flukes, which you'll see, you saw a video, either you already saw it or are about to see it, a video of, there's a lot of flukes that live in pigs, and they live in the pigs, and then after a certain amount of time, when the pig is consumed, then it transfers to a human or whoever consumes it, and it evolves into its more advanced form. So typically they have intermediate hosts. A lot of them have intermediate hosts where they're going to be found in 2 different animals during their life cycle. Most of them, again, hermaphroditic, sexual reproduction inside of the host as well. So kind of going over, you can pause and read through these. I'm going to get my thing off the screen so you can. Pause and read through these a little bit if you want to, but this is basically kind of going into how it becomes a intermediate host. So they go from snails to sheep in this particular instance, and back and forth. So the snails eat the sheep's poop. I had to say that very carefully. And get the eggs, and then once the snail passes them on, they go into the grass, which the sheep eats, and then they live inside, and then they pass the eggs out, and then it goes into a circle. Okay. Similarly, this is one that is found a lot, and so it's a little bit more. It's a very similar cycle, but this one involves the humans. This is when people get worm parasite infections. Very often, it is going to be through this particular type. So again, pause, read through it a little bit if you are interested in that cycle. And again, complex cycles, multiple hosts. So you can see here, this is a liver. It should be on the left here, a healthy liver. On the right here, a liver of an individual that had blood flukes or worms in their blood, and so they were being filtered out through their blood. And as they're filtered out of the blood, they ended up in the liver, and that ultimately led to death. So the worms and the ability of the liver to kind of not be able to do its job is what kind of led to this individual's demise, if you will. Okay. The third and final class, these are the grossest ones. I'm sure you're like, the last one wasn't? No, sorry. This is class Cestota. These are the tapeworms. All of them are parasitic, so every single tapeworm is going to be found inside of some sort of host. They do not have a digestive system. So this is a great example because in terms of the tapeworm itself, this portion up here on the top left is kind of the tapeworm. And then what happens is, so this is the scolex, and you'll see it on the next slide. The scolex is the head. They don't have eyes. These are all just mouths, essentially, and then there's a primary mouth with a bunch of barbs on it so they can attach to something. But they don't really draw things in through their mouth. In fact, most of their digestion occurs through their skin. So that just kind of diffuses through their skin. We saw that that's a feature of this particular phylum, so that's not surprising. But this is the scolex, and then after that, every one of these is essentially an egg sac. So they're called proglottids, and what they are is basically little standalone eggs that have their own little reproductive system, their own little digestive structure, everything they need, and then they can break off and go through the individual. So they have a very long body. A lot of times they're going to be found in the digestive tract of their host. And it says here they've lost most of their body systems because they don't really need them. They're extremely specialized. These are the best parasites on the planet. They are very specialized to that. And so all of the needs that they have are going to go through diffusion through the skin. Again, there's 2 portions to them. The scolex, which is the quote-unquote head, the anterior region. Okay, interrupted again. Oh, well. So again, 2 parts. We have the scolex, the head, that's the anterior region of the organism, and then the proglottids are going to be the rest of the region. They are reproductive body segments, and there's no true cephalization here, but it is obvious that the anterior end is unique when compared to the other regions. So that is going to be the end of this video, and I will see you guys soon.